The stories you're about to hear are based on true events shared by real people. I am a 20-year-old French girl. I'm sorry in advance if there are any mistakes. Hope you can understand me. I live in the suburbs, in a small residence of 6 houses. My gate is very often broken, including today. That means 80% of the time it is wide open, so everyone can fit into the small courtyard. My house has 1 floor. There are 4 bedrooms, including mine, and downstairs there is a guest bedroom which is used as a treatment room because I have big health concerns. This is where all the equipment and medicines are stored, like morphine in doses that could kill an average person. And this is where the care takes place. Also, I have a dog. I am very, very close to him. He is a little bit all my life. He feels everything to the point of sensing my epileptic seizures before they happen and recognizing the nurses who are arriving. He recognizes by the sound of their tires when they arrive in the yard. He never barks except when there is a problem. And finally, a nurse spends 4 to 5 times a day to give me care at home, including infusions. This is important for the story. That morning, like every morning, my liberal nurse arrived at 8 a.m. For the rest of the story, I'll call her Laura. She takes care of me as usual, that is to say, an infusion of a painkiller. She replaces the antibiotic diffusers. She makes me a blood test and remakes the cassette of my morphine pump. We usually chat about everything and nothing. She tells me stories with patients during the treatment. My nurses are an integral part of my life. They have looked after me for 6 years now. She leaves after 40 minutes and says to me, "See you later. I'm sure I'll be a little late. Don't worry." That day I had a medical appointment in the morning, and I was alone all day because my parents were working, except for the nurse's visits every 4 hours. Once back from my meeting, I sat on the sofa with my dog while waiting for my nurse. After a while, I heard the tire noises. I got up because I thought it was the nurse, but my dog started to growl behind the door. I looked at the time, 11:50 a.m. I told myself that it was a bit early, but sometimes instead of going after, my nurse exchanges me with the patient from before. I heard knocking. Surprised, I went to open it. Usually the nurses just come in. And I saw a young woman standing there, whom I had never seen before. She said to me, "Hello, you must be the patient. I'm Chloe, a third-year nursing student. Your nurse will be a little late, so she told me to come and start preparing, and she will arrive." I'm not wary at all. I'm used to students coming, but I'm just a little surprised that Laura didn't warn me, because usually she warns me in the morning or sends me a message, and she never leaves a student alone when it's the first time we see each other. I tell myself she must have forgotten to tell me. I bring her in and show her the way to the treatment room. I take out the things for treatment while she washes her hands. My dog is weird. He growls at her as soon as she approaches me, and he turns around me. I was embarrassed, so I left him in the living room and closed the door to be quiet. I don't really care what she does. I let her do it while I'm on my phone at the moment. She begins to put the IV on the infusion stand and takes a syringe. Normally, we rinse my central catheter with a syringe of saline already made. You just have to open the packaging. And there I see it's not a pre-made syringe, but a syringe that she has prepared. I look up and see that the ampoules for my treatments are intact and have not been opened, yet I did hear the sound of ampoules breaking. I'm starting to think it's weird. And there she starts to approach me to inject the syringe when I get a message from my nurse. "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Can you start pulling out the material?" OMG, my blood has only run for 1 spin. I got up and said, I'm just going to the toilets. I'm coming." I ran and locked myself in the downstairs toilet. The whole time my dog was barking and growling. When I opened the door, he followed me straight up, so we were both in the toilet. So I sent a message to my nurse. "There is Chloe, your student, don't worry." And then she replied, "Who?" I started crying in the toilet and was really, really scared. Chloe came and said, "Is everything okay?" I think she could see I was staying a long time. I said, yes, it's going to happen." Then I heard my front door slam. 2 minutes later, I heard it reopen. But I heard my nurse. I came out of the toilet crying. She asked me what happened. I told her about it and showed the treatment room. So we called the police. They came, they examined, took samples, the syringe, and the rest of what Chloe had prepared. The test results were received a few days after receiving the products in the syringe and the infusion. In the syringe was a paralyzer. She had put a dose that could have paralyzed a man of 120 kilograms, and I am 40 kilograms. And in the IV, it was a medicine to lower the heart rate. But it was so concentrated, it could have stopped anyone's heart. Today, we still don't know who Chloe is, and luckily, I never heard from her again. I specify that she stole all my opioids, but no other things like my tablet, which was on the bed, or my computer, which was in the living room. In retrospect, I realized that my dog had sensed that this person didn't want me well. And I tell myself that I should have watched her because she was just a student, and that my treatments are not paracetamol. And I keep wondering what could have happened if I hadn't looked at my phone. I will give you news as soon as possible if I have it. I worked as a dispatcher for a small ambulance station near a fairly large city in the Midwest. I'm not sure how specific I can be since this is a true story, and I'm going to tell one of the craziest stories I have from this job. We had a patient who we will call Margaret. She was a dialysis patient, and one of the services we offered was to transport very unwell or disabled patients to and from their dialysis appointments. She lived with her son, who we will call James. He was in his late 40s, and his mother, Margaret, was in her late 70s. Every week, like clockwork, we would have a unit bring Margaret to and from her dialysis treatments 3 times a week. Everyone knew her at the station because we had been doing this for quite some time with Margaret. We were all familiar with her and her son, whether it was the crew seeing her in person and taking care of her, or speaking to her or her son on the phone frequently about the appointments, as I had done. Everyone knew her. Naturally, when crews had news about her health, they would report back to keep everyone in the loop about how she was doing. At one point, she wasn't feeling well at all, but she still wanted to go to her dialysis appointment, so we obliged and took her in. At this appointment, while receiving dialysis treatment, she lost consciousness and was promptly taken by our crew to the hospital. When it was time for her next dialysis appointment, we called the hospital to see if she had been released and was able to go to the appointment. The hospital staff informed us that she would likely be released the following day and would be receiving her dialysis treatment at the hospital. The next treatment time rolled around, and we called the hospital again. They told us she had been released from their care the other day. This was great news, but a little strange since we were always her first call to transport her to or from any hospital or appointment, and we hadn't transported her anywhere. We quickly moved on and called James, her son, to see if she would need our services for her treatment that day. He informed us that she wasn't feeling well and wasn't up to it, but that he was considering taking her back to the hospital. We told him that if he needed us, to just give us a call, and until further notice, we canceled her trip for the day. We never got a call. The next appointment rolled around, and we called James again to ask if she would be going. He said she was sick and back in the hospital. This was strange again, since we hadn't taken her, but it didn't seem too out of the ordinary considering her health had been deteriorating. The next appointment, the same thing happened. We called James, he said his mom was in the hospital, and we moved on. Now is where things took a bit of a turn. When the next appointment came up, we tried calling James to ask about his mother's status, but he never answered or returned our calls. So since we had a contract with Margaret and were required to take her to these appointments unless told otherwise, we sent a crew to collect her for treatment. When the crew arrived at the scene, they knocked on the door with no response. They knocked again and were greeted by James, who was smoking a cigarette. Seemingly surprised, the crew said they were there to pick up Margaret for her appointment. James responded, stating he had forgotten to call, but Margaret was still in the hospital and not doing well. The crew gave their best wishes and James shut the door. But the crew felt like something was off. They immediately radioed to dispatch that something was wrong and requested that we call the hospital James said she was at to see if she was still there. The hospital had no record of her being there since we last knew. So we had the crew leave the scene, and we called for a welfare check on Margaret at her son's home. We heard nothing the rest of the day from the police, James, Margaret, or anyone else involved. The next morning I came into work, and the very first call I took began with, "This is Sheriff. I'm calling to report back on the welfare check you asked us to perform yesterday." I was nervous as he sounded concerned, and I didn't really expect them to call us back with any news. He proceeded to let me know that upon arrival at the home, they spoke with James, who was adamant that his mother didn't feel well, but was home from the hospital. The police asked to check on Margaret to make sure she was all right, and eventually James obliged, letting the police in. Once inside the home, they were met with a grim scene, though I imagine they smelled it first. They continued to explain that what the officers observed was the dead body of Margaret propped up on the couch, wrapped in blankets, as if watching television. But she had been dead for a while. They estimated she had been dead for around 2 weeks. When speaking to James, they found that he had been changing her clothes regularly and watching TV with her. Obviously, he was suffering from some sort of mental issue and grief, but the thing was, he had never taken good care of her until she was dead. No news coverage, no updates from the police beyond that, nothing. Stuff like this happens in your hometown, and you'll never know. Crazy, right? I'm a full-fledged ER nurse resident at a local hospital, and I can truly say that the place has something more going on in its halls and walls than just patient care. I had this experience a few hours ago before I got off from my shift. Many of you may or may not be familiar with an Omnicell. It's an automated medication pull-up system that some hospitals use to store medications and easily access them during medication passes. It's like an ATM, but for drugs. Being somewhat of a new nurse, I am still at that point where I go through all the medication rights before I pull and administer meds, so it's safe to say that I'm not as fast as the other seasoned nurses when I'm pulling meds. My preceptor and I had a patient who had orders for Evkeepra, for seizures, so naturally after reviewing the orders, I walked up to the med room where the Omnicell machine is located. It's a small room, just enough for one nurse to be in, which is a safety precaution to avoid distraction while pulling meds, although I've noticed it's also a famous gossiping spot. The door has a small glass window that you can peek through. As I got in front of the door, I saw a man dressed in navy blue scrubs, just like my uniform. So naturally, I waited until after he finished his med pull, assuming it was another nurse. I waited for a while, and I could still see the man inside, just standing in front of the Omnicell, not doing anything. I still haven't developed my assertive attitude, so I patiently waited longer. My preceptor soon came up to me, asking why I was taking so long, and I explained that there was still someone in there. He peeked into the window and gave me a bewildered look before saying, "What do you mean someone's in there?" We both peeked through the window and, behold, the room was empty. I had been standing at the door on guard the whole time, so he, or whatever it was in there, couldn't have left. That door is the only access in and out of that small room,